What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Game Time Discussions. I'm Cameron Selby here again, riding solo, reacting to the first wave of the NFL free agency week. Obviously, we did a preview this past week, and the NFL season officially kicked off on Wednesday, but the negotiation period started on Monday, and then there was news filtering out Sunday night into it's been a chaotic week. It's been almost a full-time job trying to keep up with everything that's going down, all the numbers, picks moving around, contracts, all that good stuff. But just wanted to jump on, give a quick reaction to some of the biggest or most notable moves so far, and what's to come, and all that good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get right into it. All right, so we're going to start off with more trades. So this one happened right as I finished recording the preview episode, but this past Friday, Geno Smith traded to the Raiders, kind of out of nowhere. He's going to the final year of his deal, but traded to the Raiders for a third round pick, which is 92nd overall. And even pairing it together, his former receiver, also Seattle trading away DK Metcalf to Pittsburgh, which we had said that he was possibly on the move, sending a trade request and all that good stuff. They were able to get a late second out of him for Pittsburgh. So Seattle nabs up a couple day two picks. Um, First off, starting with the Geno thing, I think it's kind of an interesting move for both sides. Geno, it sounded like behind closed doors, was looking for an extension again, final year of his contract, looking upwards of $40 million. And it sounds like as soon as they offered him something similar to what they ended up signing Sam Darnold, who we'll get to in a second, um, sounded like there was an immediate, like, hey, I think it's time to move on. The Raiders ended up pouncing and reunites him with Pete Carroll, who he spent with a year. Um, Very interesting. Like I said, the Raiders kind of in a flux of just kind of rebuilding, retooling, but all the moves that they made, the personnel that they've assigned, have not been necessarily parts of development. It's about win now kind of pieces. Pete Carroll as a hire doesn't necessarily scream, oh yeah, this is going to be a 3, 4, 5 year like long-term project. This is like a, hey, no, we're going to try to turn it around as best we can very quickly. Whether or not they do that, that remains to be seen. My fellow co-host Emery Cuzzy, it'll be interesting to debate and interact with him on these Raider moves. Once we do a little bit more dialogue with NFL movement, we've been doing heavy with the NFL draft content. So, it'd be interesting to see what his thoughts are for you guys. But my estimation, I think it is not necessarily a move that the Raiders should have made, more so just because of the long-term extension implications. I know off air, Emery, as a tidbit, he didn't mind it because third round pick, pretty, reasonable for a, starting quarterback to invest in, but it's also the multi-year extension. So basically, they're making this move with the intention that this is going to be a multi-year, future start. This isn't a just, hey, we're going to let him play out the contract, possibly draft a quarterback this year or even next year. This sounds like, hey, no, this is going to be his team until he either is transitioned to a backup or retires in his own right. He is 34, going to be 35 in the middle of the season. So we'll just kind of have to see what it is. Geno Smith, I did not think the Seattle thing was going to work as well as it did, and it actually did. Obviously, he was comeback player of the year for, I guess, being benched in 2023, and then 2024 followed that up with another strong season, and ended up being 10-7 first team out, lost to the tiebreaker. Very reasonable, and kudos to him for turning his career around the way he has. I just don't know if this is the right situation for the Raiders to compete with a Denver team who is humming right now. Obviously turned around, and then the Chargers, uh, the way that they're kind of set up for their future, and then the Chiefs, obviously the big dog that has to be dethroned. Does Geno Smith being added there really put you in the mix of all of that? Maybe for a game or two, but I'm not sure for the longevity of a full season, or even a few from now. So, and then moving on to the DK, not only does Pittsburgh trade a second round pick for DK Metcalf, he also was given a 5 year, $150 million extension. This is not a very Pittsburgh-esque move. Typically, they're a let diva receivers or draft really well in the mid to late rounds as receivers. We've seen that throughout at least my lifetime as a football fan. But investing in DK Metcalf, who is basically a exact archetype of what George Pickens is, really signals to me that they are moving on from George Pickens, whether it's this year or during the season or going into the next year. Obviously, he's going into a contract year himself, and it doesn't feel like you would pay two different receivers $100+ million a piece, especially when they are very similar in style and play. Um, yeah, I don't know what to make of that. And on top of that, investing that much in a receiver when you don't even have a plan at quarterback at the very moment in the long term is very puzzling to me. So, um, give or take, I'm not sure how much that'll work, but a lot of people are buzzing about that in a positive regard. One that kind of did come out of nowhere though, Houston trading their left tackle, their stalwart Laramie Tunsil, who's been with them for 3 seasons, which they got way back when in a Miami trade a couple years back. They also sent a fourth round pick basically to the Commanders for this year's third, and then next year's second and fourth, in addition to a 2025 seventh that has not officially been determined. Um, I mean, I love it for Washington. I mean, Washington, again, like I said in the preview, they've overachieved in year one, and they're just like, we got the cap space, it's time to go. And usually, when you have rookies on or rookie quarterbacks on deals where you can contend now, you just be aggressive as possible. That's what multiple teams have done, and that's how you kind of build these mini kind of dynasties or have these multi-year competitive teams. And the Commanders are just doing all they can um, to stay with and possibly usurp Philadelphia, who is losing a ton of starters on the defensive side of the ball, which they were the number one defense, and they're still a very, very good defense. So don't get me wrong, but Washington is doing a lot of moves for the second straight offseason. It worked out in a big way last year, and this one is more a long-term investment, not just a short-term, a lot of one-year deals that they were doing last year. This is, hey, left tackle the future. They have not really solved that since they traded away Trent Williams a few years back. Houston, other than Laramie Tunsil, they've really struggled on the offensive line. So allowing, him to be moved on from, who was still one of the best left tackles in football, still to this day. He does struggle with some penalties. I think he led the league in penalties this year, and then was very high in 2023 as well. Um, Not the you know most proactive move, but that basically just kind of puts them in a box of like, hey, they're going to heavily invest in the offensive line this in the draft process because I mean, obviously they were losing a couple of receivers, but the offensive line losing three starters now at this point, in addition to they released Shaq Mason after the preview video as well, who's been in and out of the lineup with injuries, but he's been solid as well. He's their second best offensive lineman. Um, yeah, Houston needs some help down there because all of a sudden it's one of the worst lines in football, and they didn't really add anybody so far that has warranted like, oh, they're going to be all right. So right now they're a bottom 3 to 5 line, and they've got some work to do in that regard. But getting an extra day two pick, that'll kind of help give a little bit of flexibility and possible aggression, especially as some of these offensive linemen in the first round kind of fall a little bit because it's completely wide open, especially after the eighth to ninth pick. It's just a crapshoot, and you'll see that when we put out our mock 2.0 in a couple of weeks. We're currently going through our positional rankings right now. If you guys want to check that out, released quarterback and running back videos. We have the receiver video going out tomorrow, and then basically 3 every week until we put out our next mock. And then big other big board, other reactions, all that fun stuff. So please check that out if y'all haven't already. But moving back to the trades, CJ GJ, who's kind of been a very solid defensive back that's kind of bounced around all of a sudden in recent years. Went to Philly, had success, then went to Detroit on a 1-year deal because they didn't want to bring him back. Then he went back to Philly. They won a Super Bowl, and now he's moving on to Houston. He's always been very good. But like I said, Houston trading away a offensive lineman. This one was a former first round pick that coincidentally they traded back when they originally had the 12th pick to Philly, and they ended up selecting Green with the 15th pick. He's been one of the worst guards in the entire NFL in the last couple of years per PFF. So it's not like of all the moves that they've made in the offensive line, the losses that they've had, that's the one that you could probably part ways with, even if it's helping out an area of the defense, which is probably a strong suit because you still have Jimmy Ward, a pair of cornerbacks in Kamari Lassiter and Derek Stingley. So very, very strong secondary, and then front seven obviously is really good as well. But like I said, line is what all Houston fans should be preaching the rest of this offseason. And then the other team in Texas made a couple of trades, kind of low risk trades for former first round picks. I saw this one tweet where they were essentially saying, if you hear the word former first round pick, then that means that, this guy's terrible or what have you. I'm paraphrasing, but Kyrie Elam and Kenneth Murray, both former first round picks. Um, Dallas making low risk moves, like I said, to basically do pick swaps late in the end of this draft to try to take a chance to plug some holes. Kyrie Elam has dealt with several injuries through the first 3 seasons of his career. He's played okay when he has been healthy, but for the most part, he has not been. And Buffalo was ready to move off them. So being able to just essentially move up 30 spots is all it took for Buffalo to move on from him. So that's not necessarily showing you that they're really getting something huge in return. And then Kenneth Murray, he's a former Oklahoma linebacker that the Chargers took, and he just has not had a single good season since he's been in the NFL. He's been one of the bottom, 90 linebackers, or he has not finished better than 90th in terms of overall PFF grade in his entire career so far as a linebacker. Dallas basically doing a pick swap of, moving back around when they have multiple picks in the back end, and on top of that, they had 4 compensatory picks that they were awarded, including 3 in the 5th round in this draft. So they had picks to kind of maneuver around, and whatever is what it is. They're both deals that can be moved on from after the season, but for the time being, Demarin Overshawn out for the year because of multi-ligament injury, and then Trayvon Diggs had another offseason surgery on his knee at the end of this past year. So uncertainty of his availability to start the season. So, and then on top of that, losing Jordan Lewis as well. So secondary and linebacker core starting to get very thin. So it's just pieces that if one of the two works in the long term, that's a win to me if you're a Cowboy fan. But if neither work, is what it is. You didn't really do anything other than move back a couple spots in the draft where you already have about 10 plus picks at this point. And then lastly, kind of an irrelevant trade, but Super Bowl champion Kenny Pickett, who was traded to Philly this past offseason to back up Jalen Hurts, moves on to Cleveland for Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a 5th round pick. I don't know what Cleveland's going to do. I don't know if that means that they're going to ride with him and move on from there, because obviously Deshaun's out for the year. They have the 2nd pick in the draft, and they're in a position to take a quarterback if they'd like to. I'm not sure if they will at this point because they also have the ability to take the best overall player in this draft if they want to go that route as well. So maybe it's some tea leaves, maybe it's not. But for the time being, if Kenny Pickett is their starter, then good luck to Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku, whoever's left there, if you invest in them via fantasy football this season. Anywho, so let's take a run the quarterback carousel. Sam Darnold, like I mentioned previously, he basically is going to Seattle now, and I am in very much fear that they are setting him up to be in the exact same situation that he was when he walked into the New York Jets when he was drafted there in 2018, or obviously when he moved on from there and went to Carolina, inheriting a bottom 5-0 line. They just traded away DK Metcalf. Obviously, Tyler Lockett is gone now, being released. So you got an injury-prone running back in Kenny Walker, who I like a lot, but back-to-back years dealing with multiple injuries. JSN, awesome receiver, but can't do it all by himself. It's him and Jake Bobo at this point. That's not really setting yourself up for success. At least Seattle is good defensively, and they were a 10-7 team that, outside of Geno and DK, which are pretty big losses, that they can, fix or resolve in the first or the second and third round with the picks that they received. It's not a terrible situation. It's not as dysfunctional as a Jets or Panthers, but I'm a little worried for his regard. Kudos to him for napping $100 million contract because he is a talented quarterback. There's a reason he was the third overall pick back in 2018, but um, I don't think the grass is always greener on the other side for players of his caliber that move on to situations like this. So outdoor football, bottom five line, not great skill group yet. There's a lot of work to be done for Seattle. On top of that, new OC. I think Clint Kubiak is now has the reins after 1 year, so we'll see how it goes. Justin Fields, he reunites with Garrett Wilson, who he spent some time with at Ohio State. 2 years, $40 million, low risk, but for the second straight or third straight offseason at this point, the Jets essentially are like it can't get any worse. Um, way back when Zach Wilson was in and out of the lineup being benched, um, coming back, or I'm sorry, no. When he was dealing with his meniscus injury, I believe, in and out of the lineup, and then the following year can't get worse than what they were dealing with, and then yeah, it got worse, and then they signed Aaron Rodgers. Well, it can't get worse than Zach Wilson, right? It got worse. So now Justin Fields, now on his third team in as many seasons. This time he gets the opportunity to go with the Jets. Like I said, it's a low risk move. The guarantees on this contract are essentially make it a 1 year plus one deal. So Justin Fields, the opportunity to move on. The thing is, again, for the third time in as many situations, going to a defensive minded coach with a okay skill group that really just only has one really superstar esque guy. At least Brees Hall and Braylon Allen is a very serviceable backfield. But other than that, you got him, Garrett Wilson, an okay line that dealt with tons of injuries, and on top of that, losing both tackles. Um, I'm rooting for him because if I was a GM, I would have held on to, or at least given him the opportunity after the strong start he had in Pittsburgh to stay the job until he loses it. And they didn't do that. They went with Russell. It looked like a great idea at first, but then obviously they really tailed off at the end. And who knows, maybe that could have been him as well if he stayed the starter. But at the end of the day, we don't really know as fans how great he really is because it seems like a lot of coaches are not really on board with the Fields train anymore. But people or the public in general love Justin Fields. That's basically the best way I can put it. Daniel Jones to Indy. Really, after Anthony Richardson's tough year, I mean, it was the worst kept secret in the world that they weren't going to add more competition to legitimately compete with him for a starting opportunity. So this is not just to back him up. This is to compete, light a fire under his ass to say, hey, you're a former top five pick. Are you the guy? Well, Daniel Jones, I mean, a lot of people have doubts on him. He's been very, very inconsistent, but also went to Giants, the New York Giants, who have been one of the most dysfunctional organizations in the last 12 years. So it didn't necessarily help his situation because he's not a quarterback that can elevate on his own. It'll be interesting to see, but I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up starting week one. I'll put it that way for the skinny. Josh Allen, historical extension, most guaranteed money of all time. Very warranted, and being a long-term deal, he did leave some money on the table on a per annual basis, and it's going to be restructured basically every year to keep people around him. So he could have got more money in spite of that shocking number on that screen. So and then a bunch of backup news. 2021 first round pick Zach Wilson to Miami. At least Miami, hopefully it's not just going to be an eyesore if and when Tua goes down because he's basically one concussion away from retirement. And as soon as he went down and we saw Tyler Huntley or whoever go in last year, it was just unwatchable football for the offense that led the league in points per game, I believe, in 2023. So Zach Wilson, maybe I don't know if Tyreek at this point, it's been kind of quiet since, the, end of season, interview that he took. Who knows if he's going to move on or not, but if he stays hypothetically, and you still have Jonnu who broke out once again, and Jalen Waddle gets back healthy, Devon Achane, you got some skill players to work with. So maybe Zach Wilson can kind of do some things with that in spot starts if necessary. But interesting move nonetheless. And then Mac Jones, way back when, Everybody thought Kyle Shanahan was trading up at the time for Mac Jones in 2021 when he went to the third pick from 12, traded 3 first round picks. He ended up going with Trey Lance. 4 years later, got his guy anyway. Don't think he's going to be expecting to compete anytime soon with Brock Purdy, but it's worth noting. And then a bunch of backups re-signing: Mariota, Stidham, Andy Dalton, Mason Rudolph, Jimmy Garoppolo, 1 or 2 year deals based on their situations. And then Nick Mullins to Jacksonville, Josh Dobbs to New England, Jacoby Brissett, longtime backups that have been going, playing musical chairs essentially the last couple of years. So, all right, skill player movement. Kind of mixed bag of things. A lot of kind of okay so moves, but the most notable, obviously, Chris Godwin. He was one of the top skill players on the market, and he ended up taking less money. New England and another team, unknown team, was reportedly after him with more money, and he decided to return to Tampa Bay, which was good on them. Basically, getting back him and Mike Evans for their final stretch. I'm just hoping he gets back healthy because he was really tearing it up, and he's been one of the best wide receiver twos in football over the last half decade when he's been healthy. But obviously, every year or so, he deals with the hammies or the whatever. And then last year, the significant injury where he did break his leg. Devontae Adams going to LA, obviously, it wasn't that much of a secret that he was trying to stay on the West Coast. The Rams have an opening because they did move on from Cooper Kupp. And so him and Puka Nacua, what a time to be alive if you're a fantasy lover of having them, and then even throwing Kyron Williams as a workhorse running back. I mean, that's just a fun trio to watch. And he showed at the end of the season that even though he went from the Raiders in a bad situation to another bad situation with Aaron Rodgers, he still can produce. He had a 200-yard half in the fantasy playoffs, so to speak. So he can still put up numbers, and even though he is the same age as guys like Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, what have you, he's being by far the most productive or the most like himself. Maybe that can have a huge dip because all of a sudden it feels like as soon as the wide receiver hits 31 or 32, they just completely, you know, crumble down the hill. Maybe he still has and can fulfill that 2 year deal. Aaron Jones resigning with Minnesota, kind of a surprise, but didn't mind the move because he was very productive and was an integral part for Minnesota last year. Evan Ingram, this was a recent one. Obviously was released by Jacksonville, signs with Denver. A lot of people will really like this move. I don't know. He hasn't been that efficient in terms of yards per catch, yards after the catch, touchdowns. He hasn't had a 5 touchdown season since his rookie year in 2017. So, maybe. I mean, it's not like it's a high risk move, but I think the public might like it more than I do at the moment. Bunch of wide receiver two movements. You got Darius Slayton re-signing for 3 year 36. Obviously, that's a laughable thing because they had hesitations on paying Saquon 12 million a year last year, and then you're going to re-sign Darius Slayton as a wide receiver 2/3 for the same price. It's kind of comical a little bit. But De'Ami Brown, earned probably millions of dollars on his 2 playoff games he had back to back in the divisional or the wild card in the divisional round. But he signed with Jacksonville for a 1 year deal, who obviously moved on from Ingram and Christian Kirk, so they needed some bodies in the pass catching department. Marquise Brown re-signing with Kansas City. I just want to see him with a full year. But Xavier Worthy, him, I don't know where she rises status in terms of injury. Not only that, but his suspension as well. So whole trio of things. It'll be interesting to see. Couple of running backs that were restricted free agents. Essentially, what that means is if you accrued 3 NFL seasons and you are a pending free agent, you are a restricted free agent, which means that a team can tender you and essentially match whatever somebody offers you. But if you choose not to match, then that team owes you that whatever pick that you designate them as. Both of these guys were designated second round picks, which means that if somebody signs Jordan Mason or Jaylen Warren, they would have to not only pay them, but also give up a second round pick. And in this rookie running back class, There's no chance in hell that somebody's doing that. So both of those guys are returning. Jalen Warren right now, the very minimum would be a 1B, and Jordan Mason going to be one of the best uh, RB2s in football because you saw what he was able to do um, subbing in for Christian McCaffrey the first half of the year before his shoulder injuries kind of took a toll on him, and then suffered another one to where they were just running back by committee towards the end of the season. Najee Harris going to give it a chance in with the Chargers. Obviously, he's a workhorse, 1,000 yards every season. That's becoming less and less impressive with the 17th game, and it just doesn't wow you to only get 60 yards a game and maybe a touchdown every other game. But Chargers are running back heavy. You saw what they were able to do with J.K. Dobbins this past year, so maybe he has a very solid prove it deal. Rico Dowdle, sneaky 1,000+ yard back, going to Carolina, who will be without Jonathan Brooks for most, if not the full season, due to tearing his ACL for the second time. But Chuba Hubbard, is no slouch. He also had 1,000 yards and was really, really strong. Um, Trio of tight ends: Juwan Johnson re-signing with New Orleans, Mike Gesicki, pretty hefty re-sign for Cincinnati. He's kind of a role player that just you can't put him in on run situations, and he's just kind of a Robin slot receiver that's 6'6" or whatever he is, and he'll have the boom games. That's why we drafted him in the 20th round in some best ball drafts. But 3 years, 25 is a pretty penny for what they probably could have gone in a different route. And then Zach Ertz, obviously, a vet that really proved at the end of the season, especially in the NFC Championship game, he was one of the few bright spots. Re-signing with Washington as well. Dallas re-signs Kevontae Turpin, who was an All-Pro kick returner, and they don't really use him on the offensive end. I don't know why they don't as a gadget guy, but he's at least worthy of the contract extension. Javonte Williams, a former second-round pick that really had a falling out with Denver. He just did not fit their situation. And anybody that wants to say, why'd you invest in Javonte Williams and not Rico Dowdle? If Rico Dowdle can run for 1,000 yards, anybody can run for 1,000 yards in Dallas's offense. But Javonte at the same time, 47th out of 47 running backs qualified in rushing grade last year. So that's not all on the system. You can't be dead last. I don't care how good you are, but he dealt with some injuries over the last couple of years, and he's still young. So who knows? But I expect him to continue making moves in the backfield. And then DeAndre Hopkins going to Baltimore doesn't excite me at all. With all due respect to him, he's a future Hall of Famer, but seems like veteran receivers just go to die in Baltimore and Tennessee at this point. But I don't expect really any kind of impact from a fantasy perspective. And I mean, he was almost a non-factor in the playoffs for a Kansas City team that had no true dominant wide receiver. So don't really expect much going forward with that. In terms of meat and potatoes, this is offensive line, defensive line. Next couple of slides. Chicago, again, on the last video, we mentioned the couple guards they traded for. Drew Dahlman, who's been a top 10 center for the last couple of years with Atlanta. He was one of the biggest interior lineman signings or pending signings, and Chicago ended up signing him. Very strong signing. It's been expensive in what they've done, but it was all necessary. Obviously, one of the worst offensive lines led the league in sacks allowed. So they need to make some changes, and they really have with 3 new starters up front. Ronnie Stanley was able to re-sign with Baltimore. He struggled with injuries. He did play the full year last year. 3 for 60, very solid get. A lot of teams were really vying for him because he was really the true franchise left tackle that was on the market. So bringing him back, kudos to Baltimore. Jalen Moore, he came over as a swing tackle from San Francisco and has very few starts. The investment that the Chiefs made in him make it seem like that's the move that they're making for now at left tackle, and I don't necessarily agree with that being the move. There's not a ton of experience there. He was okay when he did play, but going that much for somebody so limited in terms of starts, I think they could have gone a different direction because they truly have a sore need at that spot. Dan Moore, former Steeler, 4-year 82. That might be my least favorite move so far in terms of all the free agent moves. He's been a below average tackle, but he's been durable. but just not very productive. A lot of sacks allowed in the few years that he's been a starter with Pittsburgh. Signed a 4-year, 82. I appreciate the attempt by Tennessee to get the line revamped and better because they had a bottom 5 line for a couple seasons. Consecutive drafts, they did make a first round investment in Peter Skoronski, and then last year as well. Name is skipping me top of my head, but I did mention in the last video. Aaron Banks, another guard for San Francisco, they're losing a ton this offseason, maybe more than any other team, but a hefty contract that he did receive from Green Bay, but he's been a very solid guard. Patrick McCarry and Robert Hainsey, Jacksonville, you know, they like to make investments on the offensive line in free agency. That's been no secret in recent years, but neither one of these guys has played well enough to warrant, the deals that they got. But it's an attempt. That's all I can say on that regard. They did lose Brandon Scherff, for the record, who's still a free agent. Ryan Kelly going to Minnesota. Basically, Garrett Bradbury, who they drafted in the first round a couple of seasons ago, has been a bust, and they're looking to move on from him, whether it's somebody trading for him with a late, round pick or being released outright. Ryan Kelly's been a very strong starter with the Colts for nearly a decade at this point. Has struggled with some injuries in recent years, but 2-year, 18, pretty solid investment. James Daniels, another former Steeler that moves on. Miami lost both guards in the offseason, so 3 for 24, not terrible. Morgan Moses, longtime tackle. They tried him for a year with the Jets, and it just did not work. But at the same time, other than that 1 year, he's been very, very solid going back to his days in Washington. So New England, they're trying to solve one of their tackle spots, and maybe that is, very good veteran presence. Let me get some water real quick. On the defensive side, Myles Garrett obviously caved. Ended up getting 160, one of the biggest contracts in non-quarterback history. I am shocked that he caved, honestly, or at least didn't let this drag out, because at the end of the day, if you truly want to win, at this point with the way that Cleveland has gone about things in recent years, this team is not the way, and I just really am going to be sad if he has to prematurely retire because of frustration like a Joe Thomas did, because he's way too good of a player to be stuck and just never have a memorable moment in the postseason. I would have liked to see him move on. Cleveland was very, very stubborn about moving him. I think they should have, in terms of their future, because of how stuck they are. But at the end of the day, that's the move they ended up making. New England. Obviously, I mentioned Milton Williams was the highest priority defensive lineman or defensive player in general hitting the market. 4-year, 104. That was the biggest deal, I think, of any free agent so far that has been made. He was one of the highest graded defensive linemen for the best defense in football en route to the Super Bowl championship. So they had extra money, and I know that that's a hefty price tag for somebody that's been a spot starter and what have you. But at the end of the day, they had money to spend, and they still have one of the highest salary cap spaces in addition to all the moves they've made. And then Harold Landry, former Titan, he's not been playing well in recent years in terms of pass rush, grade, and win rate. But he does have the connection with Mike Vrabel going back to his days in Tennessee, so I understand the move there. Chicago with the pair of moves, again, 3 offensive starters on the offensive line, 2 defensive starters on the defensive line. Great job. I love Grady Jarrett as a player, and was pretty surprised that Atlanta was opted to move on from him. But that was a pretty reasonable deal, getting him less than $15 million per. And Dio, he had a breakout year with Indy. That's just one of those things, edges that really kind of come on strong or have a great contract year. They get paid heftily. Who knows if it'll work out, but very solid moves. Minnesota, I'm a little more confident, at least if you're just comparing 2 to 2. Jonathan Allen, great locker room guy that is coming off of one of his worst seasons, but, great presence to have around for a young team. 3 for 51, and then Javon Hargrave, who has been really lights out as a defensive lineman for Philly and then Pittsburgh and then San Francisco some of the best lines throughout his career, and then all of a sudden Minnesota is really kind of humming on the defensive line. Demarcus Lawrence obviously was a free agent from Dallas, longtime Cowboy, going to Seattle. They're going to have a really solid defense. What can I say? I mean, he hasn't been a defensive end that's going to get you 10 sacks a year, but he's one of the best run stoppers in football. Last year, I think it was a Jones fracture where he fractured his foot the week after Micah Parsons went down with an ankle sprain. Who knows? Maybe he has a couple years left, but his style of play is the one that does age well. So pretty solid sign about the Seahawks there. Arizona makes a couple moves to kind of vault their defensive line. They had a lot of moving parts, and obviously we knew that they were going to be targeting some edges. So Josh Sweat, another Eagle, getting a massive deal this offseason. And then Dalvin Tomlinson, who's been kind of bouncing around a couple teams, most recently on the Cleveland Browns, but very solid plug and play interior defensive lineman. Joey Bosa goes to Buffalo. It sounded like it was an interesting thing that San Francisco released Leonard Floyd with the anticipation that they were going to sign Joey Bosa, who's the brother of Nick Bosa. And Buffalo came in late, offered them a deal that no one else was willing to, and they swept them, whatever you want to call it, away. Buffalo, just really solid move. They've kind of had some really strong moves and then some really kind of puzzling extensions this offseason so far. But mixed bag is what it is. They're just trying to get themselves better in the now, and I think they did with this move. Khalil Mack actually was able to be re-signed by the Chargers. I was surprised that they did bring back, but like I mentioned in the preview video, it would have been really, really tough to rebound from losing both Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack in the same offseason. They were able to retain him at least for the time being, so good on them for doing that. But another defensive lineman that was leaving the Chargers, Poona Ford, longtime Seahawk, they went to the Chargers for a year. He broke out. He had a really, really strong grade. I think he was above an 82 this year as an interior defensive lineman. So all of a sudden, the Rams with him, Bobby Brown, Braden Fisk, and then Jared Verse. What a front four to start off with, and I'm sure they will add more to that in terms of depth. But Rams are looking really, really good defensively. And then Javon Kinlaw, another San Francisco 49er that is moved on from. I'm sorry, he went to Washington for a year, but former first-round pick from San Francisco, did not pan out there. Went for a prove-it deal with Washington this year. Had a really strong deal. So kudos to Washington for signing him. Obviously, they've done a lot of movement each of the last two off seasons, like I mentioned. A lot of defensive news. Mentioned that there's a ton of defensive players that were really strong gets this offseason. So Trayvon Mayrig, Trayshawn Wharton, who surprisingly led the entire Chiefs team in sacks. Did not see that coming, or did not notice that. That definitely went over my head, but signed him to a long-term hefty deal. And then Bobby Brown and Patrick Jones as depth pieces as well. So 4 different signings trying to vault because they have holes everywhere essentially, except for their cornerback one in Carolina. Denver, a couple 49ers, Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw, both moving over to the Denver side of the ball. Denver lost Cody Barton to free agency, and then safety wise, they were looking for an upgrade because both of them kind of so-so play, and then they were losing another one. DJ Jones, re-signing him was a great get because he's been one of the best defenders for a little bit. Robert Spillane, knack for football. He's a guy that Emery, I know, loves as a linebacker, the way he plays, signed in with New England. Sounded like there was a lot of surprises that he did not re-sign with the Raiders, but at the end of the day, New England had a lot of money to spend and a lot of reason to bring him in. So Nick Bolton re-signing with Kansas City. Very solid return from him. And then Bobby Wagner, Levante David, longtime linebackers, returned to their respective teams for 1-year deals. Zach Bond, breakout year last year, first team All-Pro. Philly was at least able to bring him back. They had a trio of free agents between him, Josh Sweat, and Milton Williams, and Zach Bond made the most sense to bring back, and they did just that. And on top of that, him being the cheapest of the 3 was a good get as well. And then Hassan Reddick, Obviously, the Philly to Jets disaster that was, trying to move on from that. He lost out on millions by holding out, and then now goes a 1 year deal for Tampa Bay, who's been looking for some pass rushers. Ton of DB moves. There's even more that not only is to come, but has happened already. But DJ Reed, big deal. Nate Hobbs, big deal. Charvarius Ward, Jordan Lewis, Christian Fulton, Byron Murphy re-signing with Minnesota is probably my favorite of this bunch. Reason being, Minnesota was losing every single starter on the defensive side of the ball, except for or defensive backfield, except for Harrison Smith, who is turning 36. So they needed to bring somebody back, and Byron Murphy, great year. So really like that move. Carlton Davis, big deal to New England, 3 for 60. And Paul Snodabo from New Orleans going to the Giants. Darius Slay was released by the Eagles, signing there for a year. Brandon Stevens from Baltimore replacing DJ Reed in New York. And then Javon Holland was a very sneaky signing. Very interesting because they they let Xavier McKinney walk last offseason without franchise tagging him. We saw him, I think he led the league in picks, if not tied for it. He had like 7 picks through 7 games to start the season. And this time they allow Javon Holland to stay. Obviously less money than what Xavier signed last year, but nevertheless, very interesting how they just kind of decided one thing and then did the other, or the same thing that they avoided the previous year. And then Justin Reed going to New Orleans. They had no cap space whatsoever, but did a ton of restructures to get under the cap, and then found a way to sign Justin Reed. He's reunited and paired with Tyrann Mathieu, who I think he spent a year with in Kansas City, if I remember correctly. If not, they might have swapped as they moved on. But they also spent time in Houston as well. Again, not sure if it was together, but all right. So that is basically the gist or a quick rundown of everything that's gone through. Kind of some notable moves that we're still waiting on, or at least best free agents available from the quarterback position. Aaron Rodgers is the annoying kind of what is he going to do, and doesn't even matter what he does. But it sounds like him in Pittsburgh is kind of getting closer and closer. But I would hate that if I was a Steeler fan. I'll tell you that much. His aura combined with keeping Pickens and DK, that would just be an awful thing to me. And maybe it'll turn around, maybe it won't. Russell Wilson, maybe there's Giants ties, but in the short term, he's probably going to have an opportunity elsewhere. Jameis Winston, everybody's favorite backup quarterback, is on the market. Couple backup quarterbacks for the Cowboys, Cooper Rush and Trey Lance. Carson Wentz, obviously, no longer going to have a starting opportunity, but he is a notable backup on the market. Running back wise, J.K. Dobbins, obviously breakout year. Kareem Hunt took over the role at the end of the year for the Chiefs. Gus Edwards was recently released, but I don't know how much juice he has left in him. Miles Sanders also was just released. And then Nick Chubb, who knows what's going to happen with him, but it sounds like Myles Garrett was really pushing for the Browns to re-sign him, so I don't think it'll cost a lot to do so. Receiver-wise, a bunch of 30-year-old vets, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Cooper Kupp, and Keenan Allen, all could have opportunities for the short term. Offensive lineman-wise, Tyron Smith, if he does play, he's still a serviceable starter, at least for a year or so. But if not, then he might retire because he's just dealt with so many injuries over his career. Cam Robinson, the Vikings brought him in when Christian Darrisaw went down, and he was very, very, very solid. Jedrick Wills, a former first-round pick. Cleveland moved off of this past season. Mekhi Becton, starter for the Eagles during the Super Bowl. Brandon Sheriff, longtime guard. Tevin Jenkins, former first-rounder, or second-rounder, I believe. Shaq Mason was released by the Texans. Serviceable starter. Edge rusher-wise, Darius Smith and Von Miller were released this week, so they could maybe provide some depth. Ojulari from the Giants and Dante Fowler as depth pieces. Matthew Judon has kind of been bouncing around in recent years. Calais Campbell is still kicking, like I said. Whether he retires or not, he's going to be really good. And then not many linebackers available, but Asante Samuel is probably the big fish of all the young guys. On the defensive side available, Asante Samuel, Jr. as a slot corner. Stephon Gilmore still kicking at 34 years old. And Mike Hilton, another slot corner. Justin Simmons, Julian Blackman, veteran safeties. If you want some kickers, Dusty, I'm sure will love a Joey Flyer, Austin Siebert, Michael Badgley, all that good stuff. So that is the first wave reaction. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're on the road for 250. But yeah, a whole lot of stuff to break down. A whole lot of words coming out of my mouth that were jumbled and all that good stuff. So appreciate y'all bearing with me. But like I said, a lot of draft content that we're doing the rest of this off season. It is middle of March. We're basically 6 weeks from tonight is the draft, which I'm very, very excited for. We're going to be prepping for that the rest of the this early portion of the off season, and then after that, we'll get into reactions, schedule all that stuff. But a whole lot of fun. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you guys next time.